The next group of diseases are caused by streptococci, and this is another situation very similar to what we saw with the staphylococci, where the genus name, in this case Streptococcus, refers to a cell morphology, the shape of the cells. They are spheres that grow in chains. And this genus was discovered a long time ago, and it's very common in the human microbiota. I mean, these will live in our pharynx, for example, in our nasal cavities. So we see these a lot. So you'll hear people say strep. They are always referring to the genus Streptococcus. And there are other bacteria in nature that have that cell shape. They are streptococci that have nothing to do with the genus Streptococcus. But those are not something you encounter in a clinic. So strep means Streptococcus, the genus. And you can tell it's a genus because it's capitalized and italicized. There are a lot of virulence factors the different streptococci have, but we're skipping those this semester. So you don't need to study them if you don't want to. Okay, we start with Impetigo again. This is caused primarily by Streptococcus. So again, that matters because the antibiotic susceptibility is different from genus to genus. And it's the same disease I mentioned earlier, but here's where we bring in Staph. It's typically, or very often, a mixed infection. And what we'll see is that it will appear to be caused by Streptococcus pyogenes, and then Staphylococcus aureus will invade it, and in some cases kill the Streptococcus. And then the Staphylococcus will continue the disease. And that's all I have for that. So it's complicated, and if you see someone with impetigo, your assumption can be that it was caused by Streptococcus, but you wouldn't necessarily know which bacteria is currently causing the damage. So there's that. A more serious disease, one that can be invasive and lead to very serious outcomes, is Erysipolis. And this is caused by Streptococcus, not by Staphylococcus. So this is the first streptococcal disease that is unique here. And this is where there is a infection of the dermis and the epidermis, and it causes a lot of localized inflammation. And it's specific to the Streptococcus because they have different virulence factors than the Staphylococcus do. And we aren't getting into how that works. But the point is, Streptococcus will get in through a break in the skin, and then escape from that area and cause a strong immune response, and ultimately a whole body immune response. So this is more serious than something like folliculitis or even a furuncle, because this is likely to spread. So this is something where treatment is necessary in more common cases. And also because a person experiencing this is not just experiencing a skin infection, they're experiencing a skin infection that's making them feel very sick in other organ systems. So antibiotics will slow down erysipelas. The penicillins are sometimes still used against Streptococcus. But ultimately, if it's not treated, that can lead to a fatal bacterial infection. If that wasn't bad enough, now we can look at necrotizing fasciitis, or flesh-eating disease, which is caused by a lot of different bacteria, but Streptococcus pyogenes, or group A Streptococcus, is the most common cause. And what happens here is that bacteria get under the skin. So they penetrate through the dermis and epidermis and get down into the subcutaneous fat or the fascia surrounding deeper muscles. And this typically doesn't affect the muscles per se directly. And so there's kind of what would we call it? A stereotypical disease example where a person, like a young healthy person, gets a little scratch or a cut. It would have to be deep enough to completely disrupt the epidermis, so a cut. And that heals quickly, but then over time it gets infected, and that infection just keeps getting worse and worse and worse until they're having to go in for emergency surgery and having part of a limb amputated. So it usually does start with some kind of cut or abrasion, and the other thing is if you don't treat it, it will be fatal. It will spread and spread and spread and release toxins like toxic shock syndrome toxin. So there is a streptococcal toxin that acts like the toxic shock syndrome toxin. And so this could be very dangerous very quickly. And it's also similar to gas gangrene. We haven't looked at gas gangrene yet. But gas gangrene happens when bacteria get into the deeper tissues, like often muscle, and as they ferment the carbohydrates and the lipids, they create large amounts of gas, and that creates pressure that blocks or prevents blood flow and prevents the flow of lymph. And that cuts the area off from the immune system. And so the tissue starts to die. The bacteria are basically killing the tissue and spreading through the body. And so when that happens, a person either needs to have extremely aggressive therapy or amputation. And so there is overlap between necrotizing fasciitis and gas gangrene. We can see gas in both cases. The difference is going to be what bacteria cause it and where it starts. And so necrotizing fasciitis is going to start in the deep fascia or in the hypodermis or subcutaneous fat. So if there's some kind of scratch or something and the bacteria get into the dermis and they end up getting down here, they can start growing and they won't be as susceptible to an immune response as they would be in the dermis. So if they can get down to the fascia and start growing, they will. Once they get into the connective tissues deep to the dermis, they start releasing a lot of digestive enzymes and things that are going to damage the tissues and kill tissue. And there's the cycle, the same thing, something similar to what we see with gangrene, is that in the flesh-eating disease, the immune system can't really keep up with the bacteria and the damage they're causing. And so tissues are being killed, cells are being killed faster than the immune system can really respond. So what we would see is a disruption of the fascia. Some of it would be liquefied, some of it gas would accumulate, and that gas starts to cause damage in all of the layers. As some of the gas might make it into a hair follicle, some of it might cause separations within the dermis, some of it might even erupt out of the out of the skin. And this gangrene can happen also if the blood supply is disrupted. So necrotizing fasciitis can turn into gangrene, and ultimately this is what we would see. There'd be lots of damage to all of the tissues, and gas accumulating in and bacteria accumulating in the muscle. So necrotizing fasciitis doesn't begin with the muscle, but in extreme cases it can lead to the muscle. And so that brings us to treatment for this, which is essential because this will ultimately be fatal if not treated. And so the first thing is broad spectrum antibiotics, because you wouldn't know immediately what bacteria are causing it, even though streptococcus is the most common. And then there has to be extensive surgical debridement to remove the dead tissues, because necrotic tissues are not going to grow back. They're not going to heal. And so they have to be debrided to give the body a chance to regenerate. And yeah, so that's kind of the bad outcome a young person can experience after getting a scratch. Is the next thing they know, they're in the hospital having part of their tissue debrided, and they can lose permanently some muscle tissue if this gets bad enough. I will also point out there are case studies of necrotizing fasciitis in a separate slide set on Moodle. Those are not necessary. You don't have to study them, but they are fascinating, and you can kind of get a better sense of how this goes. So that's it for the bacterial skin infections. The rest of the lecture is going to be viral skin diseases, and we'll see those in a minute.